All right, today we're going to talk about the Rocky Mountain population and their status and trends. The Rocky Mountain population is one of three populations here in the United States. That's us right here. There's the interior population to the east and the Pacific Coast population to the west. This survey that is conducted every year mainly includes here those that breed in the lower 48 in the United States. The Rocky Mountain population is guided by Pacific Flyways management plan. I do sit on the technical committee for this management plan, and it gets rewritten about every 5 years with new objectives or how we do or how things have been done in the past. So once again, this survey is tied to the second objective, which is the breeding segment should have at least 718 adults and subadults. And we use the data from this fall survey to see how well we reach our objectives. This is the breeding population here. A lot of the surveys are done in this area. As shown in Gary's slide everywhere, we have Ruby Lake Refuge in Nevada, the Summer Lake Malheur area in Oregon. There's Turnbull, the Flathead Indian Reservation, as well as the Blackfoot Valley reintroduction program. In 2015, this reintroduction program became part of the survey because that reintroduction program obtained its objectives. And I just found out the Blackfoot Valley reintroduction program has reached its objectives as well. So those numbers will be included in the fall survey report. And here's the greater Yellowstone area. And this is the core area. And then this is the expansion area. The expansion area was defined probably in like the 1980s. The goal was to get the swans out of the core area so that there wouldn't be as huge die-offs as they were in the past, and to actually start using the expansion areas and getting the birds moving there. So these areas are surveyed rather heavily. And our methodology is we do an aerial cruise survey as well as use ground surveys from trucks and vehicles. Data are collected by observers seated in the aircraft, and they fly at a very low altitude of about 30 to 60 meters above the ground, and at a certain speed to get an idea. The nice thing about swans, they're the largest waterfowl in North America. They're easy to spot. So it's a pretty easy survey to get most of the birds counted. So they count the birds in known or suspected summer habitats. Now, the important thing is the counts are not adjusted for birds present but not seen by the aerial crews. So there is unknown sampling variance that we just kind of acknowledge in the report. The analysis is we use the least squares regression on log transform data to deal with the variability of counts over years. We do a regression analysis within the traditional survey areas, and the counts are compared to last year's as well. Quick highlight last year. This is from the 2021. The 2022 survey was just completed about a month ago, and I'm still receiving data from our various cooperators and hope to get that report out. There's a total of 923 swans observed in the survey, down 5.1% from last year's count of 970. Number of white birds was 743, which, if you remember from the objective, is we're looking for 718. So we're just within that range. Cygnets did very well last year in terms of breeding. They were up 15% from last year. Reservoir levels in the area were about average. Temperatures were 2 degrees above average, and precipitation was just below average during this time frame. And part of the reason we go into these precipitation and water, I guess, looking at this stuff is we know that swan production is highly correlated, or the success of swan production is highly correlated with precipitation events. So we look at 3 general area timeframes at precipitation level. Way too fast. Okay. Here in the circle in red is the greater Yellowstone area. And you can see that from December to February, That's the snowpack, and that will get melted and run off and then fill the reservoir. So we're concerned about that time frame. And you can see from 2020 to 2021, there's a fair bit of brown, which is about 50 to 75% normal snowpack. And that'll give us an idea of what water will be coming into the system that will fill the wetlands where the swans breed. March through May precipitation, that is a concern to us because that determines with the swan nesting, building their nests, or will the nests get flooded out? So once again, you can see that we have a high degree of variability, anywhere from 150% normal to down to 50% normal. And that will affect cygnet production as well. And then we look at percent normal precipitation from June through August, where the swans are actually raising the cygnets. And you can see that once again, we have the high variability of from normal to above normal to less than normal in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And then we look at average temperature as well. And we can see that we're about average in temperature for last year. Okay, quickly, these are the numbers. We look at the greater Yellowstone flock, the restoration flock, and the RMP US breeding segment as a whole. The greater Yellowstone flock was that core and expansion area, and the restoration flocks are those birds that are outside of that area. And like I said, in 2015, we added the flathead birds from that restoration project in Northwest Montana, and you can see they made a huge increase from 611 total birds to 968, and we've been up in that 900 range ever since. So those birds from the flathead contribute a lot to the overall population of birds breeding in the U.S. And then we also break it down by states. Montana is doing quite well, as well as Idaho has been kind of on a downward trend, as well as Wyoming since about 2016 for Wyoming, when they reached a peak of 303 total birds. And there's the Flathead Indian Reservation. They've done very well, and that number continues to go up. As you saw in Gary's presentation, this has been Malheur for the past couple of years. Summer Lake has increased pretty well, and it's kind of been going up and down. And then these are the birds in Nevada at Ruby Lake National Wildlife Refuge. Once again, these birds, they come and go a lot, but talking with the staff down at Ruby Lake, the birds have been showing up later and later outside of the survey period. So I'm going to have to talk to some people. The birds have been showing up like in October. We do the survey at the end of September. Okay. We look at the trends for the RMP. On the left here in the bottom, that is the percent change from last year. And this is the trend analysis here on the right. It's going to be like this for all the slides for the areas that I'm going to talk about. You can see that for the RMP, this trend occurs from 2015 on, just because that's when those birds from the Flathead were added to the total count. And that was the last major management event. So we started a new trend line from that point. So you can see the total birds are down less than 1%, but overall you can see that the population is doing quite well. So cygnets are down 10% overall for the total RMP. We look at the greater Yellowstone flock. You can see this is a nice 3% annual growth rate since 1993. We started the trend line from 1993 because that is when winter feeding was stopped at Red Rock Lakes. And we feel that that was the last major management influence that was affecting the bird survival. So at that point, we started the trend line from that point on. And you can see both white birds and cygnets have that significant 3% annual growth rate overall. And if we look at the state of Montana, once again, there's a nice 4.5% annual significant annual growth rate since 1993. And cygnets have been continuing to go on for about a 3% annual growth rate. Idaho, there's basically been no trend going on since about 87. They're kind of all over the board. It's been holding steady. A lot of Idaho growth rate is heavily influenced by the habitat, and the habitat and the hydrology is changing. I wish Ruth Shea was here. She could talk a lot about that. But there's basically been no trend in Idaho. It's just been a steady trend. And Wyoming, nice 3.6% annual growth rate overall, as well as Cygnets has a nice 5.6% annual growth rate. So Wyoming is doing quite well. And there's the Flathead Indian Reservation. Once again, those birds are contributing a lot to the RMP population U.S. breeding segment. And there's the birds at Malheur from what Gary had shown. And Summer Lake, also in Oregon. Once again, those birds are doing pretty well. And there's Ruby Lake kind of puttering along with one or no birds at all, with no cygnet production. One of the other things we cover in the U.S. breeding segment fall report is what's happening in the core area versus the expansion area. And we kind of track the trend of total birds and cygnet production between these two areas. This is Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho core area. These are the total number of swans counted. And you can see that Montana is really driving the core area, and that's the production that occurs in the Centennial Valley at Red Rock Lakes National Wildlife Refuge. And then if we look at the expansion area, this is all Wyoming. Wyoming is driving the expansion area. And this is really actually done by the Green River Restoration Area south of here. And I'm actually, in my next talk on Thursday, I'm going to go into this in more depth. I'm doing a logistic regression analysis on these areas within the core and expansion areas. And we'll go into a little bit more as to how this looks overall in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And if we look at the cygnet production, the core area does mainly a lot of the production for cygnets. There were two times where the expansion areas produced more cygnets in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. But once again, it's nice to see both of those trend lines in the expansion and core area going up. So we do have swans breeding very well, producing a lot of cygnets, and contributing a lot to the overall health of the RMP. That's it. Any questions?
Thank you, Dave. You have a question here up front? Oh, you have an online question? Okay.
So this question says, Dave, could you explain what, if any, intermixing has been documented between the greater Yellowstone flock and the restoration flocks in the Flathead, Blackfoot, and elsewhere? Are they primarily disjunct from each other or intermingling?
That's going to be a tough question to answer, at least from what I do with my job with these swans, but there have been known instances of intermixing of birds in the Flathead, at least in Oregon. I believe Gary had mentioned some of that. But since we do not have a majority of these birds collared or tracking them, we feel that there is some mixing going on, but we don't know for sure.